Hi everyone, I'm Brian Olgeier from Insomniac Games, and I'm excited to be part of my first GA conference. A little bit about myself. I've been at Insomniac Games for over 21 years now, and I started out as a designer on the Spyro series. I was a game director on Ratchet and Clank, as well as a creative director, and now I'm focusing on user research. My team's responsible for user experience, inclusiveness, and accessibility. So for this talk, I'm going to share Insomniac's journey in terms of the accessibility development, starting with Marvel Spider-Man in 2018, and then Spider-Man Miles Morales and the Spider-Man Remaster in 2020. And then finally, our most recent title, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, which was released in June of 2021. So I'll share our progress in terms of development, but also the various stages that we hit along the way that I believe has helped us mature as a studio in supporting accessibility. So in 2018, Spider-Man broke a lot of new ground for us. It was a critical and commercial success, but it was also our first title to include a dedicated accessibility menu. But getting those accessibility features was not easy for us. We started considering them very late in the project. And this was around the alpha stage where we were feature complete. And typically after alpha, the big mantra is during that phase of production, do not break the build. That's because our focus at that point is on stability and bug fixing, and we don't want to take a lot of risk. It's just a major challenge in, of course, polishing and tuning the existing features, and it's a big mistake to try to add anything new. But we wanted to develop some accessibility features for this big title that we knew would reach a lot of players, and we wanted to do this in the final 3 months before the game shipped. So we had a meeting with the design team where there was a healthy level of skepticism on us being able to get in accessibility features in the last moments of this game development. So it was easy to see these features getting waived, and at this point we realized we need to bring in the big guns, the advocates of accessibility, people like Sam Thompson, who I'm sure everyone knows is a longtime advocate of accessibility and a senior producer at Sony. So we were fortunate to have Sam visit the studio and share his wisdom. He played a build of Spider-Man and later delivered a 2-hour presentation detailing the current status of accessibility and the opportunities for Insomniac to join the movement. We were sold. Sam pointed us to Josh Straub, who is now the CEO of a consulting group called Apex Access. Josh has consulted for games including Fortnite, The Last of Us Part 2, and Uncharted 4. Josh was born with cerebral palsy and is a passionate gamer. So thanks to Sam and Josh's feedback, we were able to identify a short yet critical list of features that could be addressed before the game shipped. And so these features included QTE taps become holds, we had large subtitles, backplates for subtitles and HUD, speaker notation, a skip puzzle option, and we disabled disorienting features like HUD parallax. So all of these features may not have gotten into the game, but fortunately it was due to Josh and Sam's insights and inspiration that really helped put the wind in our sails and push us across the finish line. So when the game came out in September of 2018, we were really surprised by just the wave of positive responses. I mean, even though we had a very short list of accessibility features, there was just a lot of love praising Spider-Man's accessibility settings. And accessibility just was one of those good news stories that came out, and it was really touching to see the impact we had on gamers. It was being nice, that we were called out at various conferences like GDC and the GA conference in 2018. However, we still had a bunch of regrets and a lot of features that we really hoped to get into the game that never got addressed. And these were features like chase assist or chases. So there's a lot of points along the way where people could not chase a villain or a vehicle, and that was pretty much a very common challenge throughout the Golden Path campaign. And we just didn't have time to hand script every single challenge to address the issues that a lot of players who had motor or vision needs that they faced. We also did not have optional controller layouts. We didn't have like a simplified controls or the ability to do like a left-hand, right-hand controls. Our control scheme was very complex and just too late to overhaul everything and put in button remapping. We were unable to include a mono audio setting for players who were hard of hearing. And yeah, just many of these features could have been easy to address had we started on them earlier in production. So we knew that if we were going to embrace accessibility early in a project, that we needed to build more internal advocates. And these are people that would represent the different departments and various disciplines and meet on a frequent basis to keep accessibility top of mind so that we were working on those features as we developed the game. And accessibility at this point started to become more of a topic of conversation. I started hearing stories about people's spouses and partners with accessibility needs. One good example is Brianna Lindsay, our lead visual effects artist, shared how her partner, Jason Bolte, who's pictured here, was a game designer at ZeniMax and became legally blind during his career, and he had temporarily left the industry. So in this photo, actually, Jason's got this little device that he's using at Disneyland, which gives him narration about the different attractions that he's nearby and really helps in terms of making the park more accessible to people with low vision. So while we were getting some internal advocates, which was great, we still did not have full buy-in from the studio. And accessibility was, of course, being discussed in many different corners. And it's not the fact that people didn't want to do it. People very much did. But it was more a simple lack of communication and making sure that it was clear to everybody that this was something we were embracing as a studio. So I gave a presentation to about 40 leaders at the studio, and I included everyone from the accessibility group to join. At the end of that presentation, all the leads gave a resounding yes, we absolutely must support accessibility, and it was time to present to the entire studio of 350 Insomniacs. So we had a company meeting entirely focused on accessibility, and it was given at our Burbank studio in Los Angeles, and it was also being streamed to our North Carolina studio on the East Coast. At the start of this presentation, I noted that there's been a big push for accessibility, not just with the gaming community and with games like The Last of Us or Uncharted, but also there's a push through legislation. In 2011, President Obama signed the 21st Communication Video Accessibility Act into law. And this act is intended to bring the laws around accessibility up to date for video services and communication that could impact video games. We had the opportunity to get ahead of this. And while legislation, and because other games do it, was motivating, it did not really speak to our culture. And this was a good moment for us to remind everyone of what our vision and mission was. So at Insomniac Games, our vision is to create games that have a positive and lasting influence on people's lives. I presented these statements to people, and these are what we commonly saw when we walked through the kitchen at Insomniac. They would be presented on a screen. Our mission is to inspire players with stories of underdogs overcoming colossal challenges. We also have a mission to challenge and inspire each other within our collaborative culture. To help the less fortunate by supporting worthwhile causes. And finally, to be leaders in the game development community. Next, I invited Jason Bolte up to the stage, and he gave this fantastic presentation called, "Can I Play Too?" And that was his fundamental question. And Jason noted that how with books, movies, TVs, and even theme parks, the answer to this question was often yes. But with games, the answer was usually maybe, and more often no. Jason played through Spider-Man and gave us a lot of feedback on the challenges he faced. And here's an image of Jason and how he typically plays video games, which is about a foot or foot and a half from a very large screen where he can easily be able to see all the elements on the screen. Jason shared what it was like for him to play games, and here's another image which is a simulation of what Jason sees when he's trying to navigate a menu. This was developed by Jason and his partner Brianna, and it simulates the condition he has, which is called RP syndrome, and that stands for retinitis pigmentosa. And essentially, he's starting to lose the vision from the center of his vision, and it's working its way more towards the outside. So this image gave us a really powerful sense of the challenge Jason experienced while navigating menus. But he also showed a capture of the first boss fight at the start of the game. And this featured a fight between Spider-Man and Wilson Fisk, also known as Kingpin. But then after that, he showed us a simulation where it darkened the center of the screen. And this again was helped developed by his partner. And as you can see here, it's very hard to be able to pick out the enemies versus the bosses. The enemies are all wearing dark clothing and the boss is all wearing black. And so this was something that Jason said he had struggled with. So it was really great to hear Jason's perspective and the challenges he had to overcome given his disability. But it was also nice the fact that Jason had a lot of game design experience. He had over 10 years. Jason stressed the importance of not relying on one single element to communicate a feature. That size, shape, texture, intensity, and color were very important differentiating elements. This was not just beneficial for people with low vision, it's just also good design. Jason also shared that his favorite challenge of the game was this Black Cat challenge, where you had to look around the city and find a cat-like object. And I was kind of surprised that a Where's Waldo type challenge was something that he enjoyed the most. And Jason solved all 30 of these because the controller would rumble when he was close to spotting the cat. And so this little extra feature not only is just good design, it made this challenge playable for Jason because it was adding an extra bit of feedback that made all the difference. And finally, we ended the presentation noting that as we all get older, there's a good chance we'll face accessibility needs at some point in our lives. Ultimately, it took a multi-staged approach in championing the studio to embrace accessibility. It was really important to stress the why, how accessibility aligns with our vision and is a studio goal, that accessibility is forward-thinking and it's thinking about a larger audience, and that ultimately improves our games by improving the design in terms of the different layers of feedback. And that it's for everybody, it's far more inclusive, and this is something that we hope to achieve as a studio. But what's most important is the how. Accessibility is a team effort. Since there's such a wide range of accessibility needs, defining features needs to be part of an ongoing collaboration with team members who look for opportunities. We need to have top-of-mind advocates who would meet monthly and keep accessibility part of an ongoing conversation. We also needed to keep thinking about how to incorporate accessibility into the design and not always rely on a setting to address all of the various needs. We also wanted to start early in pre-production and not just a few months before the game ships. And it was very important to build off of the foundation of each game so that we can always improve future games. So at this point, we had hit the first stage of our journey in adopting accessibility. We converted people at the studio to become advocates, and accessibility is now embraced by our studio culture. Our next project was Spider-Man PlayStation 5 Remaster and the Spider-Man Miles Morales game for the PlayStation 4 and 5. For these two Spider-Man games, we had the opportunity to include features we had wanted to add originally, like controller remapping. We also added Chase Assist, which was really huge for players with low vision and motor issues or motor needs. And high contrast mode. And this was something that we started talking about early on, and it was heavily promoted by Brianna Lindsay. This feature created bold graphic shapes of the hero, enemies, and NPCs to make it easier for low vision players and people with cognitive needs. This helped solve the problem we saw earlier with the Kingpin boss fight. Now it's much easier to pick out the different enemies and prioritize them because you can tell the different types by their color. So again, this feature and controller remapping were championed very early in production. And due to that early focus, we were able to get in 34 accessibility features in the new Spider-Man games, almost 5 times the number of the original 2018 Spider-Man. And this is what was our second stage of accessibility adoption that I call integration. This is where accessibility is scheduled and included as part of our production pipeline. And now I should add that we still believe there's plenty of room for opportunity for us to improve in terms of working on accessibility earlier. And certainly we've had a lot of postmortems where we've wanted to be able to get more progress and a head start early on. But the fact that we started talking about accessibility and making steps in these games at an earlier point really helped set us up for success. And also in Miles Morales, I should add that we made some strides in representation with Haley Cooper, a supporting character who's a street artist, and she lives in Miles's neighborhood. Haley's deaf and she uses sign language. She was portrayed by Natasha O'Feely, who is also deaf. And if you have not seen it already, I recommend checking out the GA conference panel with Insomniac Games' Mary Kenny, who talks about writing and developing this character. It's called Moving Disability Representation Beyond It Matters. Our most recent game was Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. This was an exciting project in that we had a new generation of Insomniacs joining the team and offering new voices and perspectives. This was also a chance to introduce Rivet, a new Lombax who is Ratchet's counterpart in another dimension. When Rivet is introduced, she has a robotic arm, and during the course of the story, Clank is injured, losing his right arm and both legs. So we had two main characters with disabilities. As we developed them, we wanted to be respectful with the message the story was sending to disabled players. We were very fortunate to be put in contact with a nonprofit group called Respectability.org, who fights stigmas and advance opportunities for people with disabilities. We met with a couple experts, Lauren Applebaum and Tatiana Lee, who provide insights in how to show Clank and Rivet as being heroic and resourceful and to avoid situations where their disabilities might be played up as being a hindrance. During one of our scenes, Rivet and Clank get captured by a giant robot known as the Fixer. And if you look closely, you can see that Rivet and Clank are these two little tiny figures caught in a giant mechanical grip. So during this dire moment, as they struggle to not get crushed, they realize that the Fixer has become disillusioned and he believes everything is broken and cannot be repaired. To which Clank replies that the Fixer still has much wisdom and has helped him realize that he is still Clank regardless of his appearance. This new perspective ultimately shifts the Fixer's thinking into having a more positive outlook, and with his renewed optimism, he decides to help our two heroes. Over the course of the story, Rivet and Clank develop a friendship, and at one point we had to answer a tough question. Would Clank ultimately get back his arm and legs? As a robot, we knew he had this option, and we originally had a scene where Rivet gives Clank some new parts, but we realized that this could send the wrong message. So to focus on that moment in an animated scene could imply that Clank appreciates no longer being disabled. So instead, we showed an image of Clank in the credits where he receives a gold arm, and it's similar to Rivet's. And the emphasis we felt here was more that it was a nice token of their friendship and not so much about Clank becoming able-bodied. So with our Haley Cooper, Rivet, and Clank characters, I believe we hit another stage of accessibility adoption called representation. Here we were portraying characters with disabilities in our games. But again, while this was a significant marker in the journey, there's still much work that can be done in terms of representation for future games. So in addition to representation, this was also our opportunity to make Rift Apart our first Ratchet & Clank game with a dedicated accessibility menu. With the PlayStation 5, we had a higher density of visuals, and it became important to include features like high contrast mode for players with low vision. And so here's a couple examples, different views of the game. One is with high contrast mode turned off on the left, where as you can see there's a couple enemies off in the distance, but a number of players would struggle to see both enemies. When you turn high contrast mode on, the two silhouettes kind of pop, and they're lit up in a red graphic color, and it's much easier to make the two of them out. We also used high contrast mode for some of the traversal elements. So on the left, you can see the three arrows, and that's a wall run. But when high contrast mode is turned on, it becomes this bright, giant pink shape, which is easier to see. And we also used it for collectibles as well, which was a big part of Ratchet and Clank, and it was much easier to find all the various bolts and Raritanium. So even though we could use features like high contrast mode and build off of feature sets that we'd used on previous games, there's a lot of new challenges with Ratchet and Clank, especially with gunplay. So there was a number of different ways to execute the different weapons. Some weapons you would want to fire repeatedly, like a machine gun. Others were slow firing weapons like grenades. And so we had to think about all the different options we could give players to help them fire these weapons and not feel fatigued. So we had different hold and toggle options depending on what the weapon was. We also had a range of aim assists that could affect how the aim camera moves. We provide aim assists that would slow down the player's aim when moving over enemy targets. There was also an option where the camera would snap to different enemies automatically. And then we had a lock-on feature where you could just lock on to an enemy and continue to move the hero around, move Ratchet or Rivet around, orbit the enemy while shooting them. But one of the trickiest challenges that we had to solve was skillful traversal. And this is a core element of what makes Ratchet & Clank an action platformer. We have many different ways for the hero to traverse, including rift tethers, which is like a dimensional themed grapple hook, hover boots, jet boots with jumps and ramps, grind boots, which is a classic mechanic from the Ratchet series requiring quick side jumps, and speedles, where you ride a creature and you have no option of slowing down. And so we had a number of different toggles and assists that could help you with these moves, but they were still very challenging, and especially when these mechanics were all chained together. So we could not address every single one of these cases, and we really needed a global solution. And the answer to this was a feature called Game Speed, which allowed the player to use a shortcut button to slow down the game at any time. So in this video here, Rivet is running through Zordon Prison, swinging along at normal speed. But once the player gets to this tricky wall run sequence, they've slowed it down to 70% with a shortcut button that allows them to then swing and then do 2 rift tethers in sequence, and having enough time to land on this platform and then resuming back to 100%. And this posed a new kind of problem which was helping players find where all of the accessibility settings existed. Subtitle settings is a good example. It's an accessibility feature, but it's widely used by both disabled and non-disabled gamers. Same as motion sickness features like center dot, motion blur, and chromatic aberration. We want non-disabled gamers who don't typically use the accessibility menu to find settings that might help them. However, other options like the high contrast settings are clearly for players with low vision. And at one point, the question came up, should we remove the accessibility menu? With the idea that all accessibility and non-accessibility settings could be folded together. So we started thinking of accessibility as being design and usability options that all players can use to tailor-make their experience. After several user research tests and hearing feedback from our disabled consultants, we came to the conclusion that it's best to keep the accessibility menu. This is the first place that disabled gamers could go to find features they need. And given how new accessibility is in games, we felt it was very important to have this menu which sends a message to the importance of inclusivity. So our solution for Rift Apart was to duplicate 38 settings that were both in the dedicated accessibility menu and the general accessibility menu. The general settings menu. And that way it would be much easier for players who are both disabled and non-disabled to find the settings they needed. During this project, we were fortunate to have Josh Straub consulting, and Jason Bolte joined us as a senior designer at Insomniac. Jason has been providing a lot of excellent design feedback for us and ideas for how we can improve accessibility. We also work closely with Sam Schaffel, who is an associate UX accessibility designer at Sony Santa Monica, and he previously helped us on Spider-Man. Now I'd like to show you a short video developed for a Sony video series highlighting our work with both Jason and Sam on Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart.
I've been gaming since I was a kid. When I was younger, I was like, oh, I wish I could communicate with developers, let them know like the challenge that I'm facing.
A lot of what we do is we ask the right questions and we know the right people to go to, like who are the right people we should be asking. If we're testing accessibility features, we want to bring in people who are going to use those, like Sam Schaffel and Jason Bolte, and having people actually on the team is super helpful because we can ask them.
I'm a game designer first and foremost, who's also legally blind. I try and make every game I make as accessible as possible.
Being able now to have that voice, it's really wonderful that this is being embraced because it's just expanding the audience and making more people a part of the conversation.
It's all about collaboration, right? I think it's awesome to have the audience as part of the process.
So to summarize our journey, we embraced accessibility in our studio culture. We later started integrating features earlier in production, and now have representation in our games. We're now asking ourselves, what is the next step for us maturing as a studio in terms of accessibility adoption? For us, that means staffing and having people with dedicated roles for accessibility. I think of people like Karen Stevens and Sam Schaffel, who have accessibility in their job titles. As our features grow, accessibility is becoming too big to be developed by advocates on the side. There needs to be dedicated roles that help us better spearhead accessibility projects and tackle our ever-growing list of features. I believe that's the next step in furthering our commitment to accessibility. These are the 4 key areas a studio must hit to be fully mature in terms of accessibility. So finally, I'd like to stress that these stages are not simply checked off in a linear timeline. It's an ever-evolving journey where we promote a culture of accessibility that leads to better integration, representation, and dedicated roles that in turn promotes a culture and continues to elevate our work in making more inclusive and accessible games for everyone. Thank you. And if you want to reach out to me, at Brian Allgeier on Twitter, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.